He is the eternal cold-craving warmth. She is a heartbeat that sounds like thunder in his crypt. When light steps into the dark, the predator must choose to feed the hunger or let himself be saved. The storm over the Cornish coast did not simply rage. It dismantled the world with the precision of a curse. Rain lashed against the jagged cliffs like handfuls of gravel, and the wind howled with a voice that sounded frighteningly human. Hermione Granger stood before the iron gates of Blackwood Manor, her wand raised, the tip glowing with a defiant, trembling light. The magic protecting the estate was ancient, tasting of copper and dried blood on her tongue. It was a heavy, suffocating ward, designed not just to keep people out, but to keep something in. "Come on," she whispered, her voice lost to the gale. She wiped a sodden lock of hair from her eyes, her fingers numb inside her dragon-hide gloves. "Yield." With a sharp, intricate movement of her wrist, she pushed her magic against the invisible barrier. For a heartbeat, the air resisted, thick as partially dried clay, and then, with a sound like a snapping cello string, it gave way. The gates groaned, swinging inward on rusted hinges that hadn't moved in a decade. Hermione didn't triumph. She shivered. The air inside the grounds was colder than the storm outside. It was a stillness that felt artificial, a held breath waiting to be released. She was a senior researcher now, 5 years post-war, buried under parchment and expectations. They called her the brightest witch of her age, but lately she felt like a candle burning in a vacuum, consuming herself with no air to sustain the flame. Finding the Blackwood Grimoire was supposed to be a distraction, a purely academic pursuit to cure a blood malediction lingering in St. Mungo's Janus Thicky ward. She hadn't expected the rumours about the manor's owner to be true. She hadn't expected the manor to feel hungry. She ascended the stone steps, the wet hem of her cloak dragging over moss-slicked flagstones. The front doors, massive slabs of black oak carved with writhing serpents, loomed above her. She didn't knock. She unlocked them with a whispered Alohomora, though the lock clicked open with a suspicious, oily ease. The entrance hall was a cavern of shadows. The air was dry, smelling of beeswax, old velvet, and the distinct metallic sharp scent of ozone. Lumos. The light from her wand skittered across a grand staircase that spiraled up into darkness. Portraits lined the walls, but the canvases were blank, the paint stripped away, or the subjects hiding deep within the frames. The silence was absolute. Not the peace of an empty house, but the tense, muscular silence of a predator crouching in tall grass. Hermione took a step, the click of her boot echoing like a gunshot. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that seemed too loud in the quiet. She was being watched. The sensation was a physical weight, pressing against the nape of her neck, prickling along her spine. "Hello," she called out. Her voice sounded thin, pathetic. "I am Hermione Granger from the Department of Mysteries. I have a warrant to search the library." No answer. Only the wind outside, now a muffled thrumming against the thick stone walls. She moved deeper into the house, guided by the instinct that had kept her alive during the war. The library was to the west. She could feel the pulse of the magic there, the grimoire calling to her like a beacon. She pushed open the double doors to the drawing room, cutting through the gloom. The room was vast, dominated by a cold fireplace and furniture draped in white sheets that looked like shrouds in the wandlight. And then, the light went out. Not extinguished by a draught, but choked, suffocated. Darkness rushed in like water filling a sinking ship. Hermione gasped, spinning around, casting a defensive shield charm blindly. Protego! The blue shield flared, illuminating nothing but dust motes dancing in the air. Leave! The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It was low, velvet smooth, and cold as a tombstone. It wasn't a shout. It was a whisper that vibrated in her chest. I have a warrant, Hermione said, her voice shaking but her stance firm. She relit her wand, brighter this time. Show yourself. A warrant, the voice repeated, dry with amusement and lacking any warmth. As if parchment holds power here. From the deepest shadow in the corner of the room, near the velvet-draped windows, a figure detached itself from the gloom. Hermione's breath hitched. She raised her wand higher, the light cutting across the room to strike the figure's face. It was a face she knew, a face she had seen in nightmares and across courtrooms, a face she hadn't seen in 3 years since he vanished from Wizarding Society. Malfoy, she breathed, the name slipping out before she could stop it. Draco Malfoy stood perfectly still, his posture rigid, unnatural. He was wearing a black frock coat that looked Victorian in cut, high-collared and severe. But it was his physical appearance that froze the blood in her veins. He was pale, not the aristocratic fair skin of his youth, but the pallor of marble, translucent and lifeless. His hair was longer, falling loosely around his face in silver strands that caught the faint light. But his eyes, they were grey, but the mercury spark was gone. In its place was a flat, endless depth, the pupils blown wide, swallowing the iris. He looked at her not with recognition, but with the focused, terrifying intensity of a starving man looking at a loaf of bread. Granger, he said. He didn't move his lips much when he spoke. He stood 30 feet away, yet his voice sounded as if he were whispering directly into her ear. You have terrible timing. You're supposed to be in France, she stammered, her logical mind trying to catalogue the threat while her instincts screamed run. The Ministry declared you an absconder. The Ministry declares many things, Draco said. He took one step forward, just one. But the movement was wrong. It was too fluid, too fast. One moment he was by the window, the next he was 5 feet closer, without the intermediate blur of motion. Why are you here, Granger? Did you come to die? I came for the Blackwood Grimoire, she said, stepping back, her wand trained on his chest. Stay where you are. He tilted his head, a bird-like, inquisitive jerk. The grimoire? Of course. Always the books. Always the pursuit of knowledge, regardless of the cost. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring. The reaction was visceral. He flinched, a spasm of pain crossing his features, followed immediately by a look of profound, agonizing hunger. He squeezed his eyes shut, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. She noticed then that he wore fine leather gloves, tight and black. You are bleeding, he said, his voice strained, dropping an octave. Hermione looked down, a small scratch on her wrist from the brambles at the gate, a tiny bead of crimson. It's nothing, she said. It is deafening, he hissed. His eyes snapped open. The grey was swallowed by black. The air in the room grew heavy, the pressure dropping until Hermione's ears popped. Get out, he snarled, the elegance gone, replaced by a feral growl. Leave this house, now. I'm not leaving without the book, Hermione insisted, though terror was beginning to claw at her throat. "Draco, what is wrong with you? You look—" "I look like what I am," he interrupted softly. He moved. It wasn't a walk. It was a blur of shadows. Hermione didn't have time to blink. 1 second he was 10 feet away. The next he was directly in front of her. She gasped, stumbling back, her back hitting the cold stone of the mantelpiece. Draco loomed over her, freezing her in place not with magic, but with sheer, overwhelming presence. He was ice cold, radiating a chill that seeped through her cloak. He placed one gloved hand on the mantelpiece beside her head, boxing her in. He didn't touch her. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. She could see the fine, dark veins beneath the translucent skin under his eyes. She realized with a jolt of horror that he wasn't breathing. His chest was perfectly still. "Do you have any idea," he whispered, his voice trembling with restraint, "how loud your heart is? It's drumming. Thump, thump, thump." Hermione stared up at him, paralyzed. The tip of her wand was pressed against his chest, but she couldn't bring herself to cast a spell. The look in his eyes wasn't just hunger, it was despair. It was a war between a monster and a man, fought in the silence of seconds. "Draco," she whispered. The use of his given name seemed to shock him. He flinched back as if she had struck him. "You possess no survival instinct," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her neck, where her pulse fluttered wildly, then snapping back up to her eyes with supreme effort. "I could tear your throat out before you finished the incantation." "But you won't," she said. It was a gamble. A desperate, terrified gamble, based on the flicker of humanity she saw drowning in the black pools of his eyes. "Because you're Draco Malfoy, and you're not a murderer. You didn't kill Dumbledore. You won't kill me." His expression twisted. Rage, shame, and something akin to agony rippled across his face. He pushed himself away from the wall, turning his back to her with a violent swirl of his coat. "You know nothing of what I am now," he spat, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "I am not the boy who cried in the bathroom, Granger. I am something less." He walked to the window, looking out at the raging storm. "The grimoire is in the library, 2nd floor, east wing. Take it and go. If you are still here when the moon reaches its zenith, I will not be responsible for what happens." Hermione let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her legs felt like water. She looked at his rigid back, the tension in his shoulders. "Why are you here alone, Draco?" she asked softly. "In the dark." "Because the dark," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "is the only place that doesn't burn." He turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see his profile in the lightning flash from the window. He looked beautiful and terrifying, a statue carved from grief. "Run, Granger," he warned, and this time there was a plea buried in the threat. "Run while I can still let you." Hermione gripped her wand tighter. Her logical mind told her to flee, to apparate the moment she crossed the wards. But her feet didn't move toward the door. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the isolation wrapping around him like chains. "I'll get the book," she said, her voice steadying. "But the storm, the wards are fluctuating. I might not be able to leave until it passes." Draco's shoulders stiffened. He didn't turn around. "Then pray the storm passes quickly," he whispered, "for both our sakes." Outside, thunder cracked, shaking the foundations of the house, sealing the promise of the night. Hermione turned toward the stairs, leaving the vampire alone in the drawing room, but the coldness of his proximity lingered on her skin like a ghost's touch. She had come for a book, but as she climbed the spiraling darkness, she knew the story had changed. She wasn't just a researcher anymore. She was a guest in a mausoleum, and the corpse was still walking. The library of Blackwood Manor was a cathedral of dust and silence, vast enough to swallow the light of her wand whole. Shadows stretched between the towering shelves like dark cobwebs, thick and impenetrable. The air here was even colder than in the hallway, carrying the distinct, biting chill of unlived-in spaces, a cold that settled deep in the lungs. Hermione moved quickly, her boots making muffled thuds on the Persian rugs that were worn threadbare by decades of neglect. She kept her wand raised, the beam shaking slightly. Every instinct she possessed was screaming at her to run, to heed Malfoy's warning. But the scholar in her, the part of her that had faced basilisks and snatchers, refused to leave empty-handed. Row 42, Section B, she whispered to herself, the sound of her own voice a fragile tether to sanity. She found the pedestal near the back, under a high arched window that rattled violently with the force of the gale outside. Lightning turned the room into a stark, monochrome nightmare for a split second, illuminating the endless rows of books before plunging them back into gloom. There it was, the Blackwood Grimoire. It was bound in pale, cracked leather that looked disturbingly like skin, pulsing with a faint, rhythmic heat that she could feel even through her dragon-hide gloves. Hermione reached out, her fingers trembling as she grasped the heavy spine. She expected a curse, a trap, but the book yielded easily, sliding into her hands with a heavy, satisfying weight. "Got you," she breathed. Clutching the book to her chest, she turned to leave. The mission was done. She could go. She could apparate the moment she cleared the anti-apparition wards at the gate. But as she took her first step toward the double doors, the manor groaned. It was a deep, structural sound, like the shifting of tectonic plates. The floorboards vibrated beneath her feet. Above the howling wind, a new sound emerged, a mechanical grinding of stone against stone. Clang. The sound of iron slamming into place echoed from the entrance hall, reverberating up the stairs. Then another. Clang. The heavy shutters on the library windows slammed shut all at once, sealing out the storm and the flashing lightning, plunging the room into absolute, suffocating darkness. "No," Hermione gasped. "Lumos Maxima." Her wand flared, casting a blinding white light that careened off the sudden claustrophobia of the room. She ran to the library doors, grabbing the brass handles. They wouldn't budge. She cast Alohomora, then Bombarda, but the spells fizzled against the wood, absorbed by the ancient, sentient magic of the house. The lockdown, she realized, horror dawning cold and sharp. The wards sensed the removal of the artifact. She was trapped. "I told you." A voice drifted from the darkness behind her, soft as velvet and sharp as a razor. "I told you to run." Hermione spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Draco was leaning against a bookshelf 20 feet away, his arms crossed over his chest. In the magical light of her wand, he looked even more devastatingly inhuman. The hunger she had seen in the drawing room was more pronounced now, a raw, open wound in his demeanor. He was trembling, fine, minute tremors that ran through his hands and shoulders. "The doors are sealed," Hermione said, her voice high and tight. She gripped her wand, pointing it at him, though she knew with sinking dread that he was faster than any spell she could cast. "The house, it reacted to the grimoire." "The house is a prison, Granger," Draco said, pushing himself off the shelf. He didn't walk. He prowled. His movements were liquid, a terrifying grace that made her eyes water trying to track him. "And now, you have locked yourself in the cell with the starving animal." He stopped 10 feet away. The air between them crackled with tension, thick and electric. "Stay back," Hermione warned, backing up until her heels hit the heavy oak desk. "I don't want to hurt you, Draco." A dry, hollow laugh escaped his lips. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the sound of glass breaking. "Hurt me?" He tilted his head, his silver eyes flashing black. "You think you can hurt me? I am already dead, Granger. The only thing you can do is tempt me." He took a deep, shuddering breath, and the look of ecstasy that crossed his face terrified her more than any threat. He was smelling her. He was dissecting the scent of her fear, the salt on her skin, the blood pumping through her veins. "You smell like rain," he whispered, stepping closer, "and old parchment, and life." "Stop it," she commanded, channeling her fear into the authoritative tone she used with subordinates at the Ministry. "You are Draco Malfoy. You are a wizard. You have a mind. Use it." "My mind is screaming," he hissed, his composure cracking. He closed the distance in a blur, slamming his hands onto the desk on either side of her, trapping her. Hermione gasped, shrinking back, the grimoire clutched to her chest like a shield. He was leaning over her, his face inches from hers. Up close, the transformation was undeniable. His skin was poreless, cold as marble. His lashes were long, casting shadows on his high cheekbones. And his mouth. His lips were parted slightly, revealing the gleam of elongated, predatory canines. He wasn't breathing. He was just existing, staring at the pulse frantically beating in her throat. "Do you know how long it has been?" he murmured, his voice a broken rasp. "Since I felt warmth? Since I tasted something other than rats and the stale blood of animals?" Hermione forced herself to look him in the eye, refusing to look at his mouth. She saw the monster, yes. But beneath the obsidian darkness of his pupils, she saw the grey, the terrified boy who had lowered his wand on the astronomy tower. "You're starving," she said softly. It wasn't a question. It was a diagnosis. Draco flinched as if she had slapped him. He pulled back slightly, his expression twisting into a sneer of self-loathing. "I am managing," he lied, the words dripping with venom. "You're shaking," Hermione countered, her voice gaining strength. She was terrified, yes, but her curiosity was beginning to override her flight response. "Your eyes are dilating randomly. You're in pain, Draco. When was the last time you fed properly?" "Don't," he snarled, turning his head away, squeezing his eyes shut. "Don't psychoanalyze me, Granger. I am not one of your little projects. I am a monster that wants to tear you apart." "If you wanted to, you would have done it by now," she stated, her chin lifting. "You had me in the hall. You have me now. You're holding back." Draco slammed his fist into the solid oak of the desk. The wood splintered with a violence that made Hermione jump, but he didn't touch her. He kept his hands planted, head hung low, his silver hair falling forward to hide his face. "You have no idea," he whispered, his voice trembling with the effort of restraint. "Every second you stand there, breathing, your heart beating that infernal rhythm, it is torture. I can hear the blood rushing in your veins, Granger. It sounds like a river. It sounds like salvation." He looked up then, and the raw vulnerability in his expression stole the breath from her lungs. He wasn't threatening her. He was begging her to understand the danger she was in. "Why didn't you leave?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I couldn't," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And I didn't want to leave you like this." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken history. The storm raged outside, throwing itself against the shutters. But inside the library, the world had narrowed to the two of them. Draco stared at her, searching for the lie, searching for the pity he despised. He found neither. He found only the stubborn Gryffindor defiance that had always annoyed him, now mixed with a strange, clinical compassion. He slowly pushed himself off the desk, backing away as if she were the one made of fire. He moved to the far side of the room, into the deepest shadows, putting the width of the library between them. "The lockdown will lift at sunrise," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the emotion from moments before. "Or when the storm breaks. Until then, stay on that side of the room." Hermione watched him retreat. She saw him hug his arms around himself, a gesture so human it made her chest ache. He was freezing, she realized. Not just cold to the touch, but suffering from the cold. The dampness of the manor must be agonizing for a creature with no body heat of its own. "Draco," she called out, cautious but firm. He didn't answer. He stood by the darkened fireplace, a silhouette of despair. Hermione hesitated, then set the grimoire down on the desk. She raised her wand, but not to attack. Incendio. A small, controlled fire roared to life in the grate across the room, near where he stood. Draco hissed, recoiling violently, shielding his face with his arm. "Put it out!" "It's just heat," she said gently, lowering her wand. "You're cold. I can see it." "I am dead," he shouted, the anger flaring again. "Dead things do not need warmth." "You're shivering," she pointed out, unimpressed by his outburst. "And I'm not. So, logically, you feel the cold more than I do." She took a step forward. He growled, a low, warning rumble in his chest. But he didn't move away from the fire. He stood near the edge of the light, the orange glow casting harsh shadows across his sharp features. He looked at the flames with a mixture of fear and longing. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "I threatened to kill you." "We both know you're all talk, Malfoy," she said, though her hands were still shaking. She sat down in one of the high-backed armchairs, far enough away to give him space, but close enough to share the warmth. "Besides, it's going to be a long night." She watched him. He watched the fire. The tension remained, a taut wire stretched between them. He was a predator, lethal and starving, and she was the prey who had decided to sit down in the lion's den. But as the minutes ticked by, marked only by the crackling of the wood and the thunder outside, Hermione saw his shoulders slowly, fractionally lower. He didn't look at her again, but he didn't leave the room. He stayed in the circle of warmth she had created, a silent sentinel in the dark, fighting a war against his own nature to keep her safe from himself. And Hermione, gripping the arms of her chair, realized with a jolt that for the first time in 5 years she didn't feel lonely. She felt terrified, alive, and utterly, confusingly captivated. Time in the library had lost its shape. It didn't flow linearly. It pooled in the shadows, heavy and viscous. The storm outside had settled into a monotonous, rhythmic drumming against the stone walls, a constant reminder of their isolation. Inside, the only light came from the fireplace Hermione had ignited, a defiant, crackling hearth that carved a sphere of gold out of the suffocating dark. Hermione sat in the high-backed velvet armchair, the blackwood grimoire open on her lap. The ancient pages were thick, smelling of crushed herbs and decay, but the words swam before her eyes. She wasn't reading. She was listening. She was listening to the silence of the man, the creature, standing on the edge of the light. Draco hadn't moved in an hour. He stood near a towering stack of encyclopedias, his back to the shelves, one shoulder resting against the wood. He was just outside the direct warmth of the fire, as if he felt unworthy of it, or perhaps because the light exposed too much. He was watching her. She could feel his gaze like a physical touch, a cold pressure against her temple. "Turn the page, Granger." His voice cut through the quiet. It was low, raspy, lacking the smooth arrogance of their school days. "You've been staring at the paragraph on blood curses for 20 minutes. Either you've lost your ability to read, or you're waiting for me to attack you." Hermione jumped slightly, her hand tightening on the book's spine. She forced herself to look up. Draco's face was a mask of sharp angles and shadows. His eyes, those terrifyingly endless pools of black, were fixed on her throat. "I'm thinking," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "You're analyzing," he corrected, a sneer curling his pale lip. "I can hear the gears grinding in that head of yours. It's louder than the wind." He pushed himself off the shelf, moving with that unnerving, liquid grace that made her stomach turn. He stopped a safe distance away, always maintaining that precise, calculated distance. "Go on then. Ask. The curiosity is practically leaking out of you. It smells acidic." Hermione closed the book slowly. She placed it on the small table beside her, her movements deliberate. She decided to stop pretending. "You're not breathing," she said softly. Draco tilted his head. "Observation number 1. Correct. Breathing is a habit I haven't quite broken, but it's unnecessary. Next." "You flinched when I lit the fire," she continued, her eyes tracing the tension in his jaw. "But you haven't moved away from it. You're cold. Freezing, actually." "The cold is pervasive," he admitted, his voice dropping. He looked at the flames, and for a second the hunger in his eyes was replaced by a deep, weary melancholy. "It settles in the marrow. It feels like drowning in ice water, forever. The fire. It doesn't warm me. It just reminds me of what warmth felt like." "How long, Draco?" He looked back at her, his expression hardening. 3 years, since the night I disappeared." "The curse on the Malfoy line," she whispered, realization dawning. "The rumors said you were looking for a cure for your mother. You found the artifact." "I found a chalice." He spat the word like a curse. "I thought it was a healing relic. It was a trap, a soul anchor for something ancient and hungry. I broke it, and in return, it broke me." He looked at his gloved hands, flexing the fingers. "It drained the life out of me and left this, a husk, a vessel for thirst." The bitterness in his voice was corrosive. Hermione felt a pang of sympathy that overrode her fear. He wasn't a monster reveling in power. He was a prisoner of his own body. "You've been here alone all this time." "Isolation is the only safety," he said sharply. "I am a danger, Granger, not a misunderstood creature from a romance novel. If I lose control, and I am always on the verge of losing control, I will drain you dry before you can lift your wand. I stay here because here there is no one to hurt." "You're hurting yourself," she said, standing up. The movement was abrupt. Draco stiffened, his body coiled like a spring. "Don't," he warned, stepping back into the shadows. "Stay in your chair." "I'm not afraid of you," she lied. It was a partial lie. The primal part of her brain was terrified, screaming that she was in a cage with a tiger. But her heart was aching for the boy who had been forced into darkness his entire life. "Then you are a fool," he hissed. Hermione ignored him. She reached for the heavy iron poker to adjust the logs in the fire. The flames had dipped low, and the room was growing colder. As she shifted the wood, a spark popped, landing on the back of her hand. She hissed, jerking her hand back, and brushed her knuckles against the rough, jagged edge of the stone mantelpiece. It was a small thing, a clumsy mistake born of exhaustion. But the skin on her knuckles split. A single, bright red bead of blood welled up. The reaction was instantaneous. Behind her, the air changed. The stillness shattered. A sound tore through the room, a strangled, gasping inhale that sounded like a drowning man breaking the surface. Hermione froze. She didn't turn around. She stared at the drop of blood on her hand, her heart skipping a beat. "Draco?" He didn't answer. She turned slowly. He was no longer by the shelves. He was 5 feet away. He had moved without sound, without displacement of air. He was crouched slightly, his posture predatory, his hands gripping the back of the sofa so hard the wood groaned. His face was a mask of agony. His eyes were entirely black. No iris, no sclera, just a void of hunger. His lips were pulled back, revealing the sharp, glistening points of his fangs. "Blood," he whispered. The word wasn't spoken. It was vibrated from his chest. Hermione's breath caught. The intelligence was gone from his face, replaced by pure, unadulterated instinct. He was staring at her hand as if it were the sun, and he had been living in a cave for a millennium. "Draco," she said, her voice trembling. She clutched her injured hand to her chest, hiding the wound. "It's just a scratch. Stay back." "I can hear it," he choked out. He took a step forward, his movements jerky, fighting his own limbs. "I can smell the iron, the salt, the sugar." He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, his head tilting back in a grotesque display of ecstasy. "It sings, Granger. It screams." "You are in control," Hermione said firmly, backing away until her legs hit the hearth. The fire was hot at her back. "You are Draco Malfoy. You are not an animal." "I am," he roared, his eyes snapping open. He lunged. It was a blur of black motion. Hermione gasped, raising her arm to shield her face, but he didn't strike. He stopped inches from her. His hands, cold, leather-clad hands, gripped her shoulders. He wasn't hurting her, but the grip was iron-tight. He pinned her in place, his body shielding her from the room, his face hovering just above the crook of her neck. Hermione stood paralyzed. She could feel the cold radiating off him, a stark contrast to the heat of the fire behind her. She could feel the trembling that racked his entire frame. He was vibrating with the effort of not biting her. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling sharply. "You smell alive," he groaned, his voice wrecked. "So warm. Why are you so warm?" "Draco, please," she whispered. Tears of terror pricked her eyes. His nose grazed the sensitive skin of her neck, sending a shiver down her spine that was not entirely fear. It was a confusing electric jolt. He froze at her whimper. Slowly, agonizingly, he pulled his head back. He looked down at her. The blackness in his eyes was receding, warring with the grey. Sweat, or perhaps condensation, beaded on his pale forehead. He looked at her face, then down to her hand, which was still clutched against her chest. "Let me see," he commanded. His voice was rough, but the feral growl was gone. "No," she said. "Let me see it." He grabbed her wrist. His touch was freezing even through the glove. He pulled her hand away from her chest. The small cut was still sluggishly bleeding. Draco stared at it. His jaw worked. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, contemplating the jump. Then, with a movement that was shockingly gentle, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a pristine white handkerchief. He didn't lick the wound. He didn't bite. He wrapped the cloth around her knuckles, pulling it tight. He kept his eyes averted, refusing to look at the blood as he bound it. "You are careless," he muttered, his voice shaking. "Clumsy, stupid." "And you," Hermione breathed, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, "are stronger than you think." He finished tying the knot. He didn't let go of her hand immediately. He held it, his thumb brushing over the pulse point in her wrist. He was measuring it, feeling the life rushing beneath the skin. For a moment, the library vanished. There was only the sensation of his cold hand on hers, the smell of rain and old paper clinging to him, and the terrifying intimacy of his restraint. He had wanted to kill her. He had wanted to consume her. Instead, he was bandaging her. Draco looked up. His eyes were grey again, but they were haunted, wide with the horror of what he had almost done. "I could have killed you," he whispered. "I wanted to. You have no idea. The urge, it is a physical pain." "But you didn't," Hermione said. She didn't pull her hand away. "You fought it. You won." He looked at her with a mix of wonder and frustration. "Why don't you run?" he asked, searching her face. "Why aren't you screaming?" "Because," Hermione said, her voice quiet but firm, "I see you, Draco. I don't see a monster. I see a wizard who is suffering, and I'm not going to leave you to the dark." Draco stared at her for a long beat. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. Then he dropped her hand as if it had burned him. He backed away, retreating into the shadows again, putting the width of the room between them. He turned his back to her, leaning heavily against the window frame. "Don't," he said, his voice sounding hollowed out. "Don't pity me, Granger, and don't mistake my restraint for kindness. I am full. I fed on a stag 2 days ago. If I were truly empty, that handkerchief would not be white." It was a cruel thing to say, meant to frighten her, meant to rebuild the wall between them. But Hermione saw the way his shoulders shook. She saw the way he gripped the window frame until his knuckles turned white. She looked down at her bandaged hand. The handkerchief was silk, embroidered with a silver M. "I'm not leaving," she said to his back. Draco didn't answer. He just stood there, watching the storm, a prisoner in his own home, trapped in a cage with the one thing he craved, and the one thing he couldn't have. The night was far from over, and the air in the library had shifted. It was no longer just fear and cold. It was charged with something else. A dangerous, fragile thread of trust, spun in the moment he had chosen to heal instead of harm. The tension was palpable, a vibrating string ready to snap. Hermione sat back down, but she didn't pick up the book. She watched him, and for the first time, she began to wonder if the grimoire was the only thing worth saving in Blackwood Manor. The silence that followed the binding of her hand was heavier than the stone walls of the manor. It was a thick, breathing entity, filling the space between the firelit hearth and the darkened alcove where Draco had retreated. Hermione sat on the edge of the velvet armchair, her eyes fixed on the white silk handkerchief wrapped around her knuckles. The embroidered silver M caught the flicker of the flames, a remnant of a life he had discarded, a symbol of a legacy that had curdled into a curse. The silk was cool against her skin, a stark reminder of the temperature of his hands. Outside, the storm had shifted its temper. The frenzied lashing of rain had settled into a relentless, droning downpour, a rhythmic drumming that seemed to isolate the library from the rest of the world entirely. They were drifting in a void, anchored only by the crackle of the logs and the tension stretching between them. Draco stood by the window, his back to her. He was rigid, a silhouette carved from tension. Hermione could see the faint tremors running through his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. He wasn't looking at the storm. He was staring at his own reflection in the dark glass, or perhaps through it, into an abyss she couldn't see. "You're pacing," Hermione said softly. She didn't look up, but she felt his movement, a restless shifting of weight. "I am standing perfectly still." His voice floated back, brittle as dry leaves. "Inside," she corrected. "Your mind is pacing." "I can feel it." Draco turned his head slightly, just enough for the firelight to catch the sharp angle of his cheekbone. "And now you are a Legilimens, a woman of many talents, Granger. Intruder, thief, psychologist." "I'm a researcher," she said, finally lifting her gaze to meet his. "And I know what suffering looks like. You can't stay over there all night, Draco. The temperature near the windows must be freezing." "I told you," he snapped, turning fully to face her. "The cold is part of the condition. It is internal. Moving closer to your little fire won't change the fact that my blood doesn't circulate." "Then why are your lips blue?" The observation hung in the air, clinical and devastating. Draco flinched, his hand raising instinctively to touch his mouth before he caught himself and dropped it, his expression hardening into a sneer. "You are unbearably observant," he muttered, pushing away from the window. He didn't come closer, but began to prowl the perimeter of the room again, keeping to the shadows of the bookshelves. "Do you ever simply stop thinking? Stop analyzing?" "No," Hermione said simply. "It keeps me sane." "Sanity," Draco laughed, a low, humorless sound. "A fragile commodity in this house." He paused by a display case filled with dark artifacts, his fingers hovering over the glass. "You think you understand, but you don't. You see a man who needs a blanket. I see a creature that needs to be chained." "Then why aren't you?" Hermione challenged. She stood up, her legs feeling steady despite the earlier terror. She walked toward the center of the room, closing the distance between them by half. "If you're so dangerous, why isn't this room lined with silver? Why aren't you in the dungeons? You have free reign of the house." Draco stopped. He looked at her, his grey eyes narrowing. Because the house is the chain, Granger. The wards bind me here. I cannot leave the grounds. I cannot step beyond the gate. I am the lord of a kingdom of dust and ghosts. He turned to face her fully, stepping into the pool of dim light cast by the chandelier. For the first time, she saw the toll the years had taken clearly. It wasn't just the pallor or the hunger, it was the exhaustion. Deep, etched lines of fatigue bracketed his mouth. His eyes were bruised with dark circles. "Do you sleep?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Draco looked away, staring at the floor. "Vampires do not sleep in the way you do. We enter a stasis, a dormant state, but I avoid it." "Why?" "Because of the dreams," he whispered. The admissions seemed to be dragged out of him. "When I close my eyes, I don't see darkness. I see red. I see the pulse of every living thing I've ever met. I hear their heartbeats like thunder, and I am always running, always hunting." He looked up, his eyes haunted. "I stay awake to keep from becoming the monster in my nightmares." Hermione felt an ache in her chest so sharp it was almost physical. The image of him, alone in this vast, decaying manor, fighting a war against his own subconscious every single night, was heartbreaking. He was punishing himself. He was starving himself, freezing himself, denying himself rest, all as penance for a nature he didn't choose. "You're torturing yourself," she said, taking a step closer. "I am managing the risk," he corrected sharply, stepping back. "Don't come closer, Granger. The bandage covers the wound, but the scent is still there. It's distracting." "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said. It was true. The fear had transmuted into something else, a fierce, protective determination. "You should be," Draco hissed. "You have no survival instinct." "I have excellent instincts," she countered. "And they're telling me that you are lonely, not lethal." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her wand. Draco tensed, his body dropping into a defensive crouch, his lips pulling back to reveal the tips of his fangs. But Hermione didn't aim at him. She aimed at the space between them. With a complex flick of her wrist, she muttered a non-verbal incantation. The air between them shimmered. A sphere of blue magical heat bloomed. Not fire, but pure, concentrated warmth, like the air of a summer afternoon trapped in a bubble. She pushed it toward him. Draco stared at the floating sphere of warmth. He looked at her, suspicious, waiting for the trap. "It's not fire," Hermione said gently. "It's a thermal charm. It won't burn. It just exists." Draco hesitated. The hunger for warmth was evidently warring with his pride. Slowly, tentatively, he reached out a gloved hand. His fingers brushed the edge of the blue light. His eyes widened. His shoulders dropped 3 inches. He stepped into the sphere. The change was instantaneous. The rigid tension that had held his body together seemed to melt. He let out a long, shuddering breath, his head falling back, his eyes closing. The blue light illuminated his face, softening the sharp angles, making him look younger, less like a predator, and more like the boy she used to know. "Better?" she asked softly. Draco opened his eyes. The blackness had receded completely, leaving only the storm-grey irises she remembered. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. It was raw, vulnerable, and terrified. "Why?" he rasped. "Why are you doing this? I insulted you. I threatened you. I am everything you hate." "I don't hate you, Draco," Hermione said, feeling the weight of the truth settle in the room. "I never hated you. I hated your choices. I hated your prejudice. But I never hated you. She took a breath. And I certainly don't hate what you've become. It's a sickness, not a sin. Draco looked at her as if she was speaking a language he didn't understand. He stepped out of the warmth, just a little, as if he felt he didn't deserve to stay in it. It is a curse, he said bitterly. And you are a fool to show it kindness. He walked over to the nearest bookshelf, pulling out a book at random, his movements agitated. You came for the grimoire. We should focus on that. The sooner you find what you need, the sooner the storm breaks, and the sooner you can leave me to rot in peace. I'm not leaving you to rot, Hermione said, her voice firm. She walked over to the desk where the Blackwood grimoire lay. And I think you know that. You let me in, Draco. You could have reinforced the wards. You could have scared me off at the gate, but you didn't. Draco slammed the book he was holding shut. Dust motes danced in the violent puff of air. I was curious, he lied, his back to her. I hadn't seen a human in years. I wanted to see if the Ministry had finally sent someone competent. You were lonely, she corrected, leaning against the desk, crossing her arms. And you were hoping someone would be stubborn enough to stay. He turned slowly, his expression dangerous again. He moved toward her, invading her personal space, using his height and his unnatural stillness to intimidate. He stopped inches from her, looming over her. Be careful, Granger, he whispered, his voice silky and threatening. You are projecting your own savior complex onto a predator. You want to fix me? You want to be the one who tamed the Malfoy monster? It is a dangerous game. Hermione didn't flinch. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze head-on. I don't want to fix you, she said quietly. I want to know you, the real you, the one who bandaged my hand instead of biting it. Draco stared at her. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The air between them crackled, charged with a sudden, confusing electricity. It wasn't fear anymore. It was awareness, acute, undeniable awareness of the proximity of their bodies. You have no idea, he murmured, his voice sounding wrecked, how much restraint this takes. Then stop restraining yourself, she whispered. It was a reckless thing to say, a challenge. Draco's eyes flared. For a second, she thought he would kiss her, or kill her. He leaned in, his cold breath ghosting over her cheek. He brought his hand up, his gloved fingers hovering millimeters from her face. He wanted to touch her. She could feel the longing radiating off him like heat. But he pulled back. He wrenched himself away with a groan of frustration, turning his back on her and pacing to the far side of the room. The book, he choked out. Read the damn book, Granger, before I lose my mind. Hermione let out a shaky breath, her knees trembling. She sat down at the desk, pulling the grimoire toward her. Her hands were shaking. Fine, she said, her voice unsteady. We'll work, but don't think this conversation is over. It is over, Draco said from the shadows, though his voice lacked conviction. Hermione opened the heavy leather cover of the grimoire. The pages were dense with archaic runes. She tried to focus, to let the scholar take over, but her mind kept drifting back to the look in his eyes, the hunger that wasn't just for blood. Draco, she said after a moment, staring at a diagram of a blood ritual. This book, it talks about reversing curses. Is that why you kept it? Were you trying to cure yourself? There was a long silence. Then Draco spoke from the darkness, his voice devoid of hope. I tried, he admitted. For the first year. I tried every spell, every potion. I nearly killed myself 12 times. He stepped back into the light, looking at the book with hatred. But the vampire curse isn't a disease, Granger. It's a transformation. You can't cure a butterfly back into a caterpillar. There's always a counter-curse, Hermione insisted, her finger tracing a line of runes. Magic is about balance. If there is a way to make you, there is a way to unmake you. And if the cost of unmaking me is my life? He asked softly. Hermione looked up, startled. What? The rituals in that book, Draco said, walking slowly toward the desk. They require a sacrifice, a life for a life. To regain my humanity, I would have to give something of equal value. He looked at her, his eyes intense. I stopped trying to cure myself when I realized the price would be someone else's soul. Hermione stared at him. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. The isolation, the refusal to feed on humans, the self-loathing. He wasn't just protecting the world from himself. He was protecting himself from the temptation of using dark magic to save his own skin. He had chosen eternal suffering over sacrificing an innocent. You're not a monster, she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. You're a martyr. Draco grimaced, looking physically pained by the word. I am a coward who is afraid of dying, Granger. Don't romanticize it. No, she said, standing up again. She reached out, and before he could pull away, placed her hand on his forearm. He froze. He looked down at her hand on his sleeve. He didn't pull away this time. You are the bravest man I know, she said. Draco looked at her and the walls he had built. The sarcasm, the anger, the coldness crumbled for just a moment. He looked lost. He looked at her hand on his arm as if it were an anchor keeping him from drifting into the void. You shouldn't touch me, he whispered, but he didn't move. You're cold, she said. I know. Let me help, she said. And in the silence of the library, with the storm raging outside, the distance between them vanished. It wasn't a physical embrace, but it was a collision of souls. The enemies were gone. The war was over. There was only a girl with a bleeding hand and a boy who was afraid of the dark, standing together in the only light that remained in the world. The warmth of her hand on his forearm was a brand. It seared through the layers of wool and linen, through the deadened nerves of his skin, and struck something vital and agonizingly alive deep within his chest. For a heartbeat, a single suspended second, Draco leaned into the touch. His eyes fluttered shut, his head bowing as if the weight of her compassion was too heavy to bear standing upright. He looked like a man finally setting down a burden he had carried across a desert. Then, the reality of who he was, and what he was, crashed back in. He wrenched his arm away with a violence that sent a gust of wind tearing through the library. "Do not," he snarled, backing away until his spine hit the sharp edge of a bookshelf. "Do not touch me with those hands, Granger. You have no idea where they've been. You have no idea what I've done." The fragile bridge of understanding that had been built over the last hour shattered. Draco's face, moments ago vulnerable and open, twisted into a mask of sneering cruelty. It was a defense mechanism Hermione recognized from their school days, the armor of the aristocrat, deployed whenever the boy beneath felt threatened. "I know exactly who you are," Hermione said, her hand suspended in the air where his arm had been. She didn't retreat, Though the temperature in the room plummeted, frost beginning to creep across the floorboards from where he stood. "You're the man who just bandaged my hand." "I am a predator playing with his food," Draco shouted. His voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling, distorted and monstrous. "Do you think, because I haven't torn your throat out yet, that I am safe? I am sated, Granger, momentarily. But the hunger is a tide. It always comes back." He began to pace, his movements jerky and blurred. He was moving too fast for human eyes to track comfortably, a deliberate display of his inhumanity. He wanted to scare her. He needed to scare her. If she wasn't afraid, she wouldn't leave. And if she didn't leave, he would eventually destroy her. "You look at me, and you see a victim," he spat, circling the desk where she stood. "You see a broken bird to be nursed back to health. It is pathetic. It is so undeniably Gryffindor." He stopped directly behind her, whispering into her ear, his voice dripping with venom. "Tell me, did you pity me when you were screaming on my drawing room floor 5 years ago? Did you think I was brave then?" Hermione flinched. The memory was a physical blow. She stiffened, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the edge of the desk. "That's low, Draco," she said quietly. "It is the truth," he hissed. "I watched. I did nothing. I am a coward, Granger. I have always been a coward. The only difference now is that I have the teeth to match the malice." He grabbed her shoulders, not gently this time, and spun her around to face him. His grip was bruising. His eyes were black pits, devoid of the grey humanity she had seen earlier. "Look at me," he commanded, baring his fangs, letting the monster surface fully. "Stop seeing the boy you went to school with. He is dead. I killed him the night I drank from that chalice, because I was too terrified to face a life without power. I chose this. I chose the dark." It was a lie, a blatant, desperate lie designed to make her hate him. Hermione looked up into his terrifying face, into the abyss of his eyes, and she didn't see a killer. She saw a man drowning, thrashing in the water, trying to push away the lifeguard because he was afraid of pulling her down with him. "You're lying," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "You didn't choose this. You told me. You tried to destroy the artifact." "Details!" he roared, shoving her back against the desk. He leaned over her, trapping her. "Why won't you listen? Why won't you run?" "Because you're shaking, Draco," she shouted back, her own temper flaring. She grabbed the lapels of his coat, pulling him down to her level. "You're shaking because you're terrified. You're not afraid you'll hurt me." "You're afraid you won't. You're afraid that if you let me in, you'll remember what it's like to be human, and that hurts more than the hunger ever could." Draco froze. Her words struck him like a physical blow. He stared at her, his chest heaving with the ghost of a breath he didn't need. The anger drained out of him as quickly as it had come, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated devastation. He looked at her hands gripping his coat. He looked at the pulse beating frantically in her throat, a bird fluttering against a cage. "It hurts," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Granger, it hurts all the time." He collapsed. He didn't fall. He simply sank. He dropped to his knees in front of her, his forehead resting against her stomach, his hands clutching her waist. It was a gesture of absolute surrender. The monster had fled, leaving behind a ruin. Hermione stood frozen, her hands hovering over his silver hair. The most prideful boy she had ever known was kneeling before her, clinging to her as if she were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. "I can hear your heart," he mumbled into the fabric of her dress. "It's so loud. It sounds like a drum. It drives me mad. And I want to stop it, and I want to protect it, and I don't know which urge is stronger." Hermione slowly lowered her hands, resting them on his shoulders. The cold radiating off him was intense, seeping through her clothes, but she didn't pull away. She stroked her thumb against the nape of his neck, a soothing, rhythmic motion. "We'll figure it out," she whispered. "The grimoire. There has to be something." Draco let out a bitter, wet laugh against her midriff. "There is nothing. I told you, the price is a life." "There's always a loophole," she insisted, her mind racing. "Magic is intention. If the curse is tied to the blood, maybe we can filter it. Maybe we can transfer the bond to something else. A simulacrum, a golem." Draco pulled back slowly, looking up at her. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed with red, the grey returning slowly like the tide coming in. He looked exhausted, older than his years. "You would do that?" he asked softly. "You would break laws, perform dark rituals, just to save me?" "I would do it to save anyone who didn't deserve this," she said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. It was personal. They both knew it. Draco stared at her, searching her face for any sign of deception. He slowly stood up, towering over her again, but the threat was gone. "You are a dangerous woman, Hermione Granger," he murmured. "You make me want things I cannot have." He reached out, his gloved hand brushing a stray curl of hair from her forehead. The touch was tentative, revered. "What do you want?" she breathed, her heart skipping a beat. "To be warm," he said simply. "Just for a moment." He leaned in. Hermione didn't move. She tilted her head back, her eyes fluttering shut. The air between them was thick with ozone and rain and the scent of old paper. His lips, cold and smooth, hovered inches from hers. He was going to kiss her. The inevitability of it hung heavy in the room. Criack. The sound was subtle, but in the silence of the library, it sounded like a scream. Draco froze. His eyes snapped open, the pupils dilating instantly into black voids. He pulled back, his head snapping toward the far corner of the library, toward the section on demonology. "Draco," Hermione whispered, opening her eyes. "Quiet," he hissed. He pushed her behind him, his body transforming instantly from lover to shield. He stood poised, his hands curled into claws, a low growl building in his throat. "Something is here." "The wards are locked," Hermione whispered, peering around his shoulder. "Nothing can get in." "Not in," Draco said, his voice dropping to a terrifying vibration. "Up. Something has come up." The temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. The fire Hermione had lit sputtered and died, plunging them into semi-darkness. The only light came from the occasional flash of lightning through the cracks in the shutters. In the corner of the room, the shadows began to move. They weren't just absences of light anymore. They were viscous, coiling things. A dark, oily substance began to seep from the floorboards, pooling and rising, taking a shape that was vaguely humanoid, but horribly wrong. "The Guardian," Hermione gasped, realizing too late. "The grimoire. It has a guardian." "I thought I killed it," Draco snarled. "I tore it apart the first night." "Guardians bound to blood artifacts reform," Hermione said, her voice trembling. It sensed the book being moved. It sensed hope. The entity let out a sound, a shriek of grinding metal and wailing voices. It lunged. "Run!" Draco roared. He didn't wait for her to obey. He threw himself at the creature. The collision was brutal. Draco moved with vampiric speed, a blur of black and silver slamming into the shadowy mass. He hit it with the force of a freight train, driving it back into the bookshelves. Wood splintered, books exploded into clouds of confetti, and the heavy oak shelves groaned and collapsed. "Draco!" Hermione screamed, raising her wand. "Stupefy! Confringo!" Her spells hit the creature, blasting chunks of shadow away, but they reformed instantly. The Guardian was made of the Manor's cursed magic. It was feeding on the ambient darkness. It lashed out with a limb that looked like a whip made of smoke. It struck Draco across the chest, sending him flying across the room. He smashed into the stone mantelpiece with a sickening crack, sliding to the floor. "No!" Hermione scrambled backward as the creature turned its eyeless gaze toward her. It wanted the book. It wanted the source of the disturbance. She pointed her wand, her mind racing through defensive spells, but she knew they were useless against a Class A construct. She needed light, real, pure light. The creature lunged for her. Before it could reach her, a blur of motion intercepted it. Draco was back. He hadn't recovered. He was broken. His coat was torn, his chest heaving, blood, dark, sluggish vampire blood, oozing from a wound on his shoulder. But he was there. He didn't use magic. He used his curse. He grabbed the creature by what passed for a neck, his fangs bared in a snarl that was purely animalistic. He ripped into the shadow, tearing at it with his hands, using his unnatural strength to physically dismantle the magic holding it together. The creature shrieked, thrashing. It drove a spike of shadow through Draco's leg. Draco didn't even flinch. He roared, a sound of pure rage, and slammed the creature into the floor, pounding it, tearing it, until the shadows dissolved into harmless black sludge. Silence crashed back into the room. Draco stood over the dissipating puddle of darkness. He was swaying. His coat was in ribbons. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, the bone clearly broken. "Draco," Hermione whispered, stepping forward. He spun around. He looked monstrous. His face was streaked with the black ichor of the creature. His eyes were wide, blown black, wild with the adrenaline of the kill. His fangs were fully extended, glistening. He looked at her, and for the first time, Hermione saw genuine shame. He looked at his own hands, coated in black slime and his own blood. He looked at the wreckage of the library. He looked at her, standing there with her wand raised, small and fragile and alive. "Don't!" he choked out. He backed away, stumbling. His leg gave out and he fell to one knee, catching himself with his good hand. "Stay back," he warned, his voice a gargled rasp. I am not in control." "I don't care," Hermione said. She dropped her wand. It clattered on the floorboards. She walked toward him, not running, not sneaking, walking with purpose. "You saved me," she said. "I am a monster," he wept, bowing his head, unable to look at her. "Look at me. Look at what I do." "I am looking," Hermione said. She reached him and knelt down in the debris, ignoring the ruin of his clothes and the black sludge. She reached out and took his face in her hands. His skin was freezing, sticky with blood, but she didn't pull away. She forced him to look at her. "I see you, Draco," she said fiercely. I see you. Draco stared at her, his chest heaving. The black in his eyes began to recede, fighting a losing war against the grey. He was terrifying. He was beautiful. He was broken. And Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age, realized with a terrifying clarity that she had not just found a book in Blackwood Manor. She had found the one thing she couldn't leave behind. "Let me heal you," she whispered. Draco closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against hers, and for the first time in 3 years he let out a sob. It was a sound of absolute defeat and absolute trust. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." The silence that followed the destruction of the Guardian was not peaceful. It was the stunned, ringing silence of a battlefield after the last cannon has fired. The library was a wreck. Shelves splintered like rib cages, books scattered like dead leaves, and the air thick with the acrid metallic tang of dark magic and ozone. Hermione knelt on the floorboards, the damp cold of the manor seeping through her jeans, but she felt none of it. Her entire world had narrowed to the man. The creature slumped before her. Draco was conscious, but barely. He was propped up on one arm, his head hanging low, his silver hair matting with sweat and the black, viscous ichor of the shadow beast. His breathing was a ragged, wet sound, a reflex he couldn't stop, even though his lungs didn't need the air. It was the sound of panic. "Draco," she said, her voice trembling not with fear, but with an urgency that surprised her. "We need to move. I need to see the wound." He let out a harsh, strangled laugh that turned into a cough. "Leave me," he rasped, spitting a glob of black blood onto the floor. "I'm healing. It just takes time." "You're not healing," Hermione countered, her eyes scanning his form. The shoulder of his coat was shredded, the fabric fused with the flesh beneath. The wound inflicted by the Guardian wasn't bleeding red. It was oozing a sluggish, dark substance that looked like mercury mixed with tar. That wasn't a normal attack. That was necrotic magic. It's poisoning you. "I am already dead, Granger," he snapped, trying to push himself up and failing. His arm gave way, and he collapsed back onto the floor with a groan that tore at her heart. "You cannot poison a corpse." "Stop being an idiot!" Hermione cried, grabbing his good arm. She hauled him up, her muscles straining against his dead weight. He was heavier than he looked, dense like stone. "I am not going to watch you rot on this floor because of your pride. Get up." Draco looked at her, his eyes wide and glazed with pain. The blackness had receded, leaving the grey irises blown wide, rimmed with red. He looked shocked that she was touching him, shocked that she was shouting at him. "You are persistent," he muttered, but he didn't fight her. He let her pull him up. Together they stumbled across the ruined library. Hermione guided him to the high-backed velvet armchair near the hearth, where the embers of her earlier fire were still glowing faintly. She deposited him there, and he slumped back, his head lolling against the headrest, his eyes closing. Hermione didn't waste a second. She grabbed her wand from where it had fallen, reigniting the fire with a slash of movement. Incendio Maxima. The flames roared to life, casting a golden, flickering light over the scene. She turned back to him. In the light, he looked devastating. His skin was the color of old parchment, translucent enough that she could see the dark, stagnant veins beneath. He was shivering violently now, the shock setting in. "I need to take off your coat," she stated, stepping between his spread legs to get better leverage. Draco's eyes snapped open. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist. His touch was ice, burning cold. "No," he hissed. "Draco, the fabric is in the wound." "I said no," he snarled, his grip tightening. "You don't want to see. Underneath, it is not polite." "I am not looking for polite," she said, looking him dead in the eye. "I am looking for damage. Let go." They stared at each other, a silent battle of wills fought in the space of a heartbeat. Hermione saw the shame burning in his eyes, a deep, ancient shame that had nothing to do with the wound and everything to do with what he had become. He didn't want her to see the monster's architecture. "If you don't let go," she whispered, "I will stun you and cut it off." Draco's jaw worked. Slowly, resentfully, he released her wrist. He turned his face away toward the fire, staring into the flames as if he wished he could step into them. Hermione moved quickly. She cast a severing charm, careful to aim only at the fabric. The ruined frock coat fell away in heavy, sodden strips. Then the linen shirt beneath soaked in black blood. She peeled the fabric away from his skin. Hermione sucked in a sharp breath. He was right. It wasn't polite. It was a map of suffering. His torso was lean, the muscles defined but wiry, speaking of starvation rather than health. But it was the scars that held her gaze. The old ones, the Sectum Sempra scars across his chest, were still there, silver and jagged. But overlaying them were new marks. The bite scar on his neck was a jagged, ugly thing, raised and purple. And radiating from his heart were black spiderweb veins, the physical manifestation of the curse that kept his heart from beating. And on his left forearm, the dark mark. It hadn't faded to a scar like Harry's. On the dead, unrenewing skin of a vampire, it remained stark, black, and ink-sharp. "Done staring?" Draco asked, his voice dead. He refused to look at her. "I'm not staring," Hermione lied, her voice thick. She forced her eyes to the wound on his shoulder. It was a gouge, deep and ugly, the edges crying black tears. The flesh around it was grey and bubbling. "I need water," she said, her healer's training taking over, suppressing the emotional turmoil. "And dittany. Do you have any?" "Bathroom, adjoining door." He jerked his chin toward the shadows. Hermione ran. She returned seconds later with a basin of water, towels, and a dusty bottle of essence of dittany. She knelt between his legs again, placing the basin on the floor. She dipped the towel in the water. It was cold. "This might sting," she said automatically, then winced. "Or whatever the equivalent is for you." "It won't sting," Draco muttered, his eyes still fixed on the fire. "My nerve endings are dampened. I feel pressure. I feel the cold. Pain is distant." Hermione brought the wet cloth to his shoulder. She began to clean the wound. The moment the cloth touched him, Draco hissed, his back arching off the chair. His hands clenched the armrests so hard the wood creaked. "You said it wouldn't hurt." "It doesn't hurt," he gasped, his head throwing back, exposing the vulnerability of his throat. "It burns, not the wound. You." Hermione froze. "Me?" Draco looked down at her then, his expression tortured. "You are warm, Granger. You are so unbearably warm. Your hands, the heat radiating from you. It feels like branding irons against my skin." Hermione pulled back, horrified. "I'm hurting you." "No," he breathed, his chest heaving. "Don't stop. It's a good burn. It's the first thing I've felt in years that isn't just numbness." He looked at her with a raw, desperate intensity that made her breath hitch. He wasn't asking her to stop. He was asking her to continue, even though her very existence was an agony to his senses. Hermione swallowed hard. She rinsed the cloth, the water turning inky black. She returned to the wound, her movements gentler now, revered. She cleaned the black ichor away, revealing the pale, torn flesh. She uncorked the dittany and dripped it onto the cut. Green smoke billowed up. The flesh knit together sluggishly, much slower than on a human, but it was working. "Tell me something," Hermione said quietly, needing to fill the silence, needing to distract him from the sensation of her heat. "Tell me about the Guardian." Draco watched her hands. He seemed mesmerized by the contrast of her pink, living skin against his own grey pallor. "It was a fragment," he murmured, his voice losing its edge. "Of the family magic. The Blackwoods were necromancers. They bound their souls to the house. When I tried to leave, when I tried to take the grimoire, it manifested. You fought it before. Every night for the first month," he said. "It keeps me here. It feeds on my despair. It knows I cannot defeat it because I am part of it now." "You defeated it tonight," Hermione pointed out. She finished cleaning the wound and began to wrap a clean bandage around his shoulder, her arms reaching around his torso to secure it. For a moment, it looked like an embrace. Her cheek brushed his uninjured shoulder. He smelled of rain, old books, and the metallic scent of blood. There was no warmth coming from him. He was like a statue carved from ice, but he felt solid, real. Draco went rigid at the contact. He stopped breathing, or stopped pretending to breathe. "I didn't defeat it," he whispered into her hair. "I just wanted it to stop looking at you." Hermione froze. She pulled back slightly, just enough to look up into his face. They were inches apart. The firelight danced in the reflection of his eyes. "Why?" she asked. Draco looked at her, his expression unguarded for the first time. The exhaustion had stripped away his defenses. "Because you are the only thing in this house that is real," he said. "Everything else is dust and memory. You are color. In a world of grey." He raised his hand. It trembled. Slowly, tentatively, he reached out and touched her cheek. His fingers were freezing. Hermione gasped at the cold, but she didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "You're so cold," she whispered. "I know," he murmured. His thumb traced her cheekbone, then the line of her jaw. He was memorizing her. "I am a void, Granger. I consume heat. If you stay too close, I will drain the warmth right out of you." "I have plenty to spare," she said, opening her eyes. Draco stared at her, his lips parted. He looked at her mouth. The hunger was there. She could see the pupils dilating again, but it was mixed with a terrible, aching longing that had nothing to do with blood. He leaned in. Hermione's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that he must be able to hear like a drumbeat. "Draco," she breathed. He stopped a millimeter from her lips. He closed his eyes and inhaled, taking in her breath. "I can't," he whispered, pulling back abruptly. He dropped his hand from her face as if he had been burned. "Draco." "No!" He stood up, stumbling slightly, putting distance between them. He grabbed the back of the chair to steady himself. "You have to go. The storm is breaking. I can feel the wards shifting." Hermione stood up too. "I'm not leaving you like this. You're still weak." "I will recover," he shouted, turning his back on her. "I always do. But you, if you stay, I cannot promise I will be able to stop myself next time." "Stop yourself from what?" Hermione challenged, stepping toward him. "Killing me? Or kissing me?" The question hung in the air, audacious and undeniable. Draco turned slowly. His face was a mask of torture. "Is there a difference?" he asked softly. "For a creature like me, to kiss you is to want to consume you. The impulses are wired together, Granger. Love and hunger, they are the same wire now." He looked down at his hands, the hands that had just killed a shadow monster, the hands that had gently bandaged her finger. "I am dangerous," he said, his voice breaking. "I am not the romantic hero of your story. I am the villain, and the villain always destroys the thing he loves." Hermione walked up to him. She didn't stop until she was standing in his shadow. She reached out and took his hand, the one with the dark mark. She interlaced her fingers with his. "Then rewrite the story," she said. Draco stared at their joined hands. The black ink of the snake seemed to writhe on his skin, but Hermione's grip was firm. She wasn't looking at the mark. She was holding the hand. "You are stubborn," he whispered, shaking his head. But he didn't let go. His thumb brushed against her knuckles, a silent, terrified caress. "I'm Gryffindor," she said with a faint smile. "We're known for walking into fires." "You will get burned," he warned. "Maybe," she admitted, "but I'm not leaving you in the cold." She squeezed his hand, and for the first time in 3 years, Draco Malfoy squeezed back. The storm outside finally began to quiet, the howling wind dying down to a mournful sigh. But inside the library, the atmosphere had shifted irrevocably. The fear was gone, replaced by a tension that was heavier, deeper, and infinitely more dangerous. Hermione had crossed the line. She had touched the monster and found the man. And Draco, standing in the wreckage of his self-imposed prison, was beginning to realize that the walls he had built to keep the world out were no longer enough to keep her out. He looked at her, and the hunger in his eyes changed. It wasn't the red hunger of the predator anymore. It was the desperate human hunger of a man who had forgotten what it was like to be touched, and was suddenly, terrifyingly, being offered a hand to hold in the dark. "Stay," he whispered, the word barely audible. "Just until dawn." Hermione nodded. Until dawn. She led him back to the chair. She didn't leave. She sat on the rug beside him, leaning her head against his knee. And as the fire crackled and the shadows lengthened, Draco Malfoy sat perfectly still, his hand resting tentatively on her hair, terrified that if he moved, the illusion would shatter. The dawn did not break. It bled into the library. It started as a thinning of the shadows, a sickly grey luminescence that seeped through the cracks in the heavy shutters. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt heavy, pressing against Hermione's eardrums as she stirred. She was stiff. Her neck was crooked at an awkward angle, her cheek resting against something rough and cold, the velvet of the armchair, and beneath it the unyielding marble of Draco's knee. She blinked, disoriented. The fire had died down to a bed of sullen, glowing coals. The air was frigid. "You're awake," a voice whispered from above her. Hermione sat up, rubbing her face, the memories of the night crashing back in a chaotic wave. The Guardian, the blood, the bandage, the hand-holding. She looked up. Draco hadn't moved. He was still sitting in the chair, his posture rigid, his injured arm cradled against his chest. He was staring at the sliver of grey light cutting across the floorboards with a look of profound, weary resignation. "Did you sleep?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Don't be absurd," he murmured, not looking at her. "I spent the last 4 hours counting your heartbeats. You average 62 per minute when you're dreaming. It spikes to 75 when you twitch." He turned his head slowly. He looked wrecked. The bruises under his eyes were stark against his pallor. His skin had a greyish, waxen quality to it that scared her. The healing process had drained him. "You need blood," she said, the healer in her taking over. Draco flinched, a spasm of distaste crossing his features. "I need you to leave." He nodded toward the window. "The storm is gone. The wards have reset to their passive state. You can apparate as soon as you clear the gates." Hermione stood up, her joints popping. She looked at the Blackwood grimoire sitting on the desk, the object she had come for, the reason for this entire surreal nightmare. It seemed insignificant now. "I can't just leave you here, Draco. Your shoulder is healing." He cut her off. He stood up, but the movement lacked his usual grace. He swayed, catching himself on the mantelpiece. He hissed, shielding his eyes as the light from the window grew slightly stronger. "The sun," he muttered, backing away into the deepest alcove of the room, behind the heavy velvet drapes. "It's headache-inducing." Hermione watched him retreat. He was putting the physical boundaries back in place. The daylight was his enemy, and she was a creature of the sun. The metaphor was clumsy, but effective. She walked over to the desk and picked up the grimoire. It was heavy in her hands. "This book," she said, turning to face his shadowed corner. "I read the introduction while you were resting. The Counter Curse. It requires a soul of the innocent, willingly given." Draco laughed from the shadows, a dry, bitter sound. "Precisely. And since I am fresh out of innocent souls and not particularly keen on murder, we are at an impasse. There is no cure, Granger. There is only management." "So you'll just stay here?" Hermione asked, her voice rising. "Forever? In the dark? Eating rats and waiting for the roof to collapse on you?" "It is a penance," he said softly, "and it keeps the world safe from me." "It's suicide by slow motion," she shouted, slamming the book down. The noise echoed. Draco didn't respond. Hermione grabbed her bag, shoving the grimoire inside with trembling hands. She felt a surge of irrational anger, not at him, but at the unfairness of it. He had saved her life last night. He had fought his own nature to keep her safe, and his reward was another eternity of solitude. "Fine," she said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. She marched toward the door. "I'm leaving." "Good." His voice floated back. "Don't look back, Granger. It doesn't suit you." She reached the double doors. She gripped the brass handles. They were cold. She could walk out. She could go back to the ministry, file her report, hand over the book, and go back to her safe, warm flat. She could pretend this was just a mission. But her feet wouldn't move. She remembered the feeling of his hand on her hair, the way he had whispered, "Stay," the terrifying vulnerability in his eyes when he admitted he was lonely. She let go of the handles. She turned around. "No," she said. Draco stepped out of the shadows. He looked furious. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, I'm not leaving yet," she said, walking back into the center of the room. She dropped her bag on the floor. I have questions about the research, about the manor, about you. I am not a research subject, he snarled, advancing on her. I am a vampire, you stupid witch. The sun is up. My control is fraying. I am hungry, I am in pain, and you are standing there smelling like vanilla and blood and life. He stopped 10 feet away, his chest heaving. Do you have a death wish? I have a trust wish, she said calmly. Trust. He looked at her as if she were insane. You trust me, after last night? Especially after last night. She took a step closer. You didn't hurt me. You protected me. I wanted to eat you, he roared. The confession tore out of him, raw and ugly. Every second you were asleep, I was fighting the urge to bite you. I sat there, smelling your pulse, imagining how it would taste. I am a monster, Hermione. Stop trying to make me human. He used her first name. The silence that followed was deafening. Hermione looked at him. She saw the fear behind the rage. He was trying to scare her away because he didn't trust himself. You used my name, she said softly. Draco froze. He looked horrified. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. Slip of the tongue. Draco, she said, walking up to him. He tensed, but he didn't back away this time. He was cornered by his own emotions. She stopped right in front of him. She could feel the cold radiating off him, a chill that raised goosebumps on her arms. Why did you ask me to stay? She asked. He wouldn't look at her. He stared at a point over her shoulder. I was delirious, shock from the wound. Liar, she whispered. You asked me to stay because you didn't want to be alone in the dark anymore. He looked down at her then. His eyes were a storm of conflict. And if I did, what does it change? You are light, Granger. You belong out there in the sun. I belong in the crypt. We are incompatible physics. Physics has nothing to do with it, she said. She reached out and took his hand. It was limp, cold, but his fingers twitched against hers. And for the record, I've always preferred the library to the outdoors. Draco stared at their joined hands. A shudder ran through him. You have the book, he whispered. You have what you came for. Not everything, she said. She squeezed his hand. He looked at her, his expression crumbling. The arrogance, the sarcasm, the walls, they all dissolved. He looked like a man who had been holding his breath for 3 years and was finally, terrifyingly, letting it out. You will regret this, he warned, his voice shaking. I am not easy to be around. I am moody. I am cold. I cannot go to dinner parties or walk in the park. My life is this house. I'm a researcher, she reminded him with a small, sad smile. I like puzzles, and I'm very patient. Draco let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He raised his other hand, the injured one, and touched her hair, clumsy and reverent. Why? He asked again, the eternal question. Why me? Because, Hermione said, looking up into his grey eyes, you're the only one who keeps up with me. It was a joke, a callback to their school rivalry, but it broke the tension. A corner of Draco's mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile, not quite, but it was the ghost of one. Arrogant, he murmured. Observant, she countered. He looked at her for a long moment, searching her face. Then, slowly, he pulled her closer, not aggressively, not with hunger, but with a desperate need for contact. He wrapped his arms around her waist, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He was careful to keep his teeth away from her skin. He just held her. He pressed his cold body against her warmth, soaking it up like a flower turning toward the sun. "You feel impossible," he whispered against her skin. Hermione hugged him back, wrapping her arms around his broad, freezing shoulders. She could feel the slow, heavy thud of his heart, a magical echo of life that beat only because she was there. "I'm real," she said. "I'm here." They stood there in the center of the ruined library, the dust motes dancing around them in the shafts of morning light. The vampire and the witch. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a cure. The curse was still there, the hunger was still there, and the world outside would never understand. But as Draco held her, Hermione felt the tension in his body finally, truly snap. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was leaning on her. "I need to feed," he whispered, the admission costing him everything. Not you, but I am weak." "I know," she said, stroking his hair. "We'll figure it out. There are potions, blood replenishers. We can get supplies from St. Mungo's. I can modify the nutritional content." Draco pulled back to look at her. He looked stunned. "You would do that?" "I told you," she said, brushing a smudge of soot from his cheek. "I'm not leaving." He stared at her, and the look in his eyes changed from despair to something fierce. Something possessive and fiercely protective. "If you stay," he said, his voice low and intense, "you play by my rules. No wandering the grounds at night, no provoking the house magic, and if I tell you to run, you run." Hermione smiled. It was a challenge. "I'll take it under advisement." Draco shook his head, looking defeated and awestruck all at once. "You are going to be the death of me, Granger. Again." "Or," she said softly, "the life of you." He looked at the window where the sun was now fully up, casting bright squares of light on the floor. He didn't flinch this time. He looked back at her. "Perhaps," he whispered. He released her, stepping back into the safety of the shadows, but he didn't turn his back. He watched her. "Go," he said, nodding toward the door. "Send your owl, get your supplies, but come back." "I will," she promised. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She paused, looking back at the solitary figure in the dark coat, standing amidst the ruins of his life. "Draco?" "Yes?" "Try to get some sleep. Real sleep." He looked at her, his silhouette sharp against the gloom. "I might," he said. "The nightmares seem quieter now." Hermione smiled and walked out into the hallway. The heavy doors clicked shut behind her, but the lock didn't turn. The cage was open, and for the first time in 3 years, the prisoner wasn't looking at the bars. He was waiting for the visitor to return. The morning air outside was crisp and clean, smelling of wet earth and sea salt. Hermione took a deep breath, clutching the strap of her bag. She had the grimoire. She had the mission accomplished. But as she walked down the stone steps toward the gate, her mind wasn't on the ministry or the accolades. It was on the cold, lonely man in the library and the way he had looked at her hands as if they held the entire universe. She wasn't just a researcher anymore. She was a lifeline. And as she passed the rusted iron gates, she knew with absolute certainty that she would be back before sunset. The sun had been dead for hours. Blackwood Manor had reclaimed its natural state, a monolith of shadows and silence, standing defiant against the crashing waves of the Cornish sea. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of bruised purple and a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing against the windows. Draco Malfoy stood in the centre of the drawing room, staring at the empty grate where Hermione had lit a fire the night before. The ashes were cold. The room was cold. He was cold. He had spent the last 6 hours convincing himself that she wouldn't return. It was a logical exercise, a way to brace for the inevitable abandonment. She is brilliant, he told himself, gripping the back of a dusty velvet chair until the wood groaned. She is rational. She walked out into the sunlight, felt the warmth on her skin, and realized that this tomb, this creature, is madness. He looked down at his shoulder. The bandage she had applied was still there, a stark white strip against his black shirt. The pain had dulled to a throbbing ache, but the deeper ache, the hollow, gnawing hunger in his chest, was growing sharper with every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. He wasn't just hungry for blood, he was starving for the sound of her voice, and that terrified him more than the thirst. Click. The sound was small, metallic, and impossible. Draco froze. His enhanced hearing picked up the heavy groan of the front door hinges, the soft scuff of boots on the stone floor of the entrance hall, and then, unmistakable and rhythmic, the rapid thump, thump, thump of a living heart. He didn't move. He couldn't. He stood paralyzed, caught between hope and disbelief as the footsteps approached the drawing room. Hermione stood in the doorway. She looked exhausted. Her hair was wild, frizzed by the sea air, and she was carrying a heavy leather satchel that looked like it contained half the inventory of an apothecary. But her eyes were bright, fierce, and fixed on him. "You're in the dark again," she said softly, her voice echoing in the vast empty room. Draco let out a breath he didn't need. "Old habits," he rasped. He cleared his throat, trying to summon the arrogance that usually served as his armor, but found it shattered. "I thought you had come to your senses." "I went to London," she said, walking into the room. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look at the shadows in the corners. She walked straight toward him, placing the heavy bag on the low table between them. "I had to file a preliminary report. Artifact secured. Area unstable. Further investigation required." Draco stared at her. "You lied to the Ministry." "I omitted certain details," she corrected, a small conspiratorial smile touching her lips. "Like the fact that the unstable area is currently standing in front of me wearing a shirt that needs mending." She began to unpack the bag. Vials of dark red liquid, jars of salve, wrapped bundles of herbs. The scent of potion ingredients filled the air, masking the smell of dust and decay. "Blood. Replenishing potion, modified with essence of aconite to suppress the predatory drive," she listed, setting a vial down. "Nutritional supplements used for werewolf recovery. I figure the metabolic needs are similar. And fresh bandages." She looked up at him. "Drink the red one. Now." Draco looked at the vial. It wasn't warm blood. It wasn't the living pulse he craved, but he could smell the iron in it. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and took it. He uncorked it and downed it in one swallow. The effect was immediate. The sharp, clawing pain in his stomach receded. The red haze at the edge of his vision cleared. The beast inside him, which had been pacing frantically, curled up and went to sleep. He set the vial down. He looked at her. "Better?" she asked. "Quiet," he whispered. "It is quiet." Hermione nodded, satisfied. She walked around the table and stood in front of him. She was close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her body, a tangible aura of life. "Your shoulder," she said, reaching out. "It's fine," Draco said, stepping back instinctively. "It's healing." "Draco," she warned. He stopped. He let her approach. She didn't check the wound this time. Instead, she reached for his hand, the one still encased in the black leather glove. "Why do you still wear these?" she asked quietly, her fingers brushing the smooth leather. Draco looked down at their hands. "Because I am ice, Granger. Direct contact, prolonged contact. It damages living tissue. It saps the heat. I don't want to hurt you." "You've been protecting me from yourself," she said, realization dawning in her eyes, "since the moment I walked in." "It is the only way I know how to care," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "To build a wall." Hermione looked at him, her expression shifting from clinical concern to something softer, deeper. She slowly, deliberately began to peel the glove from his left hand. Draco tensed. "Hermione, don't. It will be uncomfortable." "Let me decide what is uncomfortable," she whispered. She pulled the glove off finger by finger. The leather slid away, revealing his hand. It was pale, elegant, the skin flawless and cool as marble. She didn't flinch. She didn't drop it. She took his bare hand in hers. Draco hissed, a sharp intake of breath. The sensation was overwhelming. Her skin was hot, shockingly hot against his. It felt like holding a burning coal, but there was no pain, only a rush of sensation that travelled up his arm and exploded in his chest. "You're freezing," she murmured, curling her fingers around his, trying to share her warmth. "And you?" he choked out, staring at their joined hands with wide, wondering eyes. "Are burning." He looked up at her face. The fear was gone. The hunger was gone. There was only this, the impossible reality of her hand in his, skin to skin, without barriers. "It doesn't hurt," she said, watching his reaction. "It feels grounding." Draco slowly raised his hand. He hesitated, his eyes searching hers for permission. She didn't pull away. She leaned in. He cupped her cheek. Her skin was soft, warm, alive. He could feel the pulse in her jaw. He could feel the blood rushing beneath the surface. But for the first time in 3 years, he didn't want to spill it. He wanted to protect it. "I have been alone for 1,000 years, he whispered, his thumbs stroking her cheekbone. "Even before the vampire curse, I was alone. I was cold." "You're not alone now," Hermione said. Her eyes were wet, shimmering in the dim light. She covered his hand with hers, pressing it closer to her face. Draco made a sound, half sob, half laugh. He looked at her with a reverence that bordered on worship. The darkness of the manor seemed to recoil from them, pushed back by the sheer force of the connection between them. "You are stubborn," he murmured, a faint smile touching his lips. A real smile this time, not a sneer. "You are reckless. You are infuriating." "And you," she whispered, stepping closer until their bodies were touching, "are overdue for a reward." Draco's breath hitched. "A reward?" "For not eating me," she teased gently, "and for saving my life." She went up on her tiptoes. Draco went still. He knew he should stop her. He was a monster. He was dead. He was dangerous. But as she drew closer, all the reasons why they shouldn't be together dissolved into dust. He lowered his head. Their lips met. It wasn't a devouring kiss. It wasn't the kiss of a predator claiming prey. It was soft. It was tentative. It It was cold meeting heat, winter meeting spring. Draco's lips were cool, smooth as glass, but they moved against hers with a desperate tenderness. He kissed her like she was made of porcelain, like he was terrified he would shatter her. Hermione didn't shatter. She melted. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down, deepening the kiss. She poured her warmth into him, defying the cold, defying the curse. Draco groaned low in his throat, his arms coming around her waist, pulling her flush against him. He held her tight, burying his hands in her hair, anchoring himself to her. For a moment, he forgot the hunger. He forgot the manner. He forgot the years of silence. There was only her taste, vanilla and magic, her heat, her heart beating against his chest, a steady drumbeat that promised life. When they finally broke apart, breathless, though only one of them needed air, Draco rested his forehead against hers. He kept his eyes closed, savouring the aftershocks of the moment. "You are warm," he whispered, his voice full of wonder. "I can feel it, inside." "Good," Hermione breathed, her hands resting on his chest, right over his silent heart. "Keep it." Draco opened his eyes. The grey was clear, bright, shining with a new light. "I can't leave this place, Hermione," he said, the reality returning, but softer now. "The curse, the bond to the estate. I am still a prisoner." "I know," she said. She didn't look daunting. She looked determined. "The grimoire is complicated. The counter-curse will take time to decipher. It might take months, maybe years." She looked around the dusty, shadowed room, then back at him. "But I have a lot of vacation time saved up," she said, "and I can work remotely." Draco stared at her. "You would stay? Here? In this mausoleum?" "It's not a mausoleum," she said firmly. She reached out and took his hand again, intertwining their fingers. "It's a library, and it just needs a little light." She raised her wand. Lumos. The tip of her wand glowed, a warm golden sphere of light that floated up toward the ceiling. It didn't banish the darkness completely. The shadows still lingered in the corners, but it pushed them back. It illuminated the dust motes, turning them into gold dust. It lit up the weary face of the man standing before her, making him look less like a ghost and more like a survivor. Draco watched the light, then looked back at her. The skepticism was gone. In its place was a fierce, quiet devotion. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles, right over the bandage he had tied there the night before. "Then stay," he whispered against her skin. "Stay and haunt me, Granger." "I intend to," she smiled. Outside, the ocean continued its eternal assault on the cliffs, and the wind howled around the stone towers of Blackwood Manor. But inside, for the first time in a generation, the fire in the hearth began to catch, and the cold was no longer absolute. Draco Malfoy, the vampire of Blackwood, was still a creature of the night. But as he pulled Hermione Granger into his arms, surrounded by the scent of old books and rain, he knew he would never be truly in the dark again. He had found his son, and she had chosen to burn for him.
Bad guy, but here he is just broken. He is cold and he is very lonely. He thinks he is a monster. He thinks no one can love him. I think many of us know that feeling. Sometimes we build walls to protect ourselves. We hide in the dark because we are afraid. But then there is Hermione. She is a brave, She does not run away. She brings a light into his dark house. She chooses to stay. I wanted to show you one thing. Even if you feel broken, you deserve warmth. You deserve someone who holds your hand. Love can find you, even in the darkest places. I hope this story made you feel something real today. Thank you for being here with me. I suggest we don't say goodbye just yet, but listen to one more story on my channel.